Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
My name is Gene, and I too am an alcoholic. And always when I identify myself as an alcoholic, I base that identification on how I interpret the definition of the word alcoholic as is defined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous, a book written by alcoholics for alcoholics. And in that book they said, we alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. And that's all they said. They didn't make any mention to how much you drank, what you drank, where you drank, or what happened as a result of your drinking. They didn't say in order to be an alcoholic, you got to drink wine, live on Skid Row, spend weekends in drunk tanks, marry the same woman 4 or 5 times, and these are things that can happen to anybody that drinks. I certainly would be remiss if I failed to thank the committee for inviting me down here. This is a lovely part of California. I live up in the other end of California in what is known as the wine country, the Napa Valley. Where I come from, they call winos connoisseurs, you know. They still puke the same, though. You know, I find it pretty easy to have something to share with you tonight because of a little conversation we had at dinner time here. You know, there's a part of my life that I've always sort of kept private. I don't really know why. I mean, I'm not ashamed of it or anything like that. My family, well, I don't know how you would describe it, I guess. Organized crime, I guess that's the best way. We're big in that, in the old Irish gangs. I'm from a section of New York City, which would, I guess, be referred to now as a ghetto, and I was born and raised in New York City amidst a lot of that kind of activity. And somehow tonight, due to some of the people that were sharing the dinner table with us, that we had something in common, that a few of us were all from New York, and we got to talking about names that probably wouldn't be familiar to you or familiar to a lot of newspaper reporters and judges and wardens and guys like that. And so ever since we had this conversation tonight, I've been sort of thinking about what I would refer to, I guess, the old days, you know, the old days when I was a kid growing up there in New York City. I don't have much of an education. That'll be very obvious to most of you. I was a total flop in school, and I did get a diploma from high school, but that was just to make sure I didn't come back. I was placed in what the New York State Board of Regents referred to as special education. Nowadays they call it welcome back Cotter, because that's the kind of a situation I was in. You stayed in the same room for 8 years. And depending upon which came first, dating the teacher or smoking, determined when you got the hell out of there. And finally a time came when I was to leave that elementary school level and go on into the high school level. And I guess that's where I experienced my first really traumatic experience, especially of being applied to education. Because I was informed that in high school it was a requirement that each incoming student take a foreign language. Now, what seemed odd to me is I've been getting F in English for 8 years. And I couldn't understand why they wanted me to take a foreign language. I sort of imagined that if I passed anything foreign, they'd probably ship me there or something like that. And I don't really recall the choices. I think it was something like German, French, Italian, and Spanish, something like that, which none of them could have helped me any. My older brother Jack was along with me, and I'm an Irish Roman Catholic, so obviously as a small boy, I had to serve on the altar of the church. So I know the Latin of the Mass, and I know the Confiteor and a few things like that. And so my brother said, you know, you don't have much of a chance here with your choices. He said, I suggest you take Spanish. He says, it's a little bit like Latin. It might help you out a little bit. So as a freshman, I took Spanish 1. And as a sophomore, I took Spanish 1. And as a junior, I took Spanish 1. And I was still taking Spanish 1 when I was a senior in 1941, and I split from high school and I enlisted in the United States Marines. And I lost my virginity in a house of ill repute in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. And I learned more Spanish that night than I did in the whole 4 years in high school. Now, I don't tell you that to prove any kind of vulgarity on my part. I say this with the deepest depth of my heart. That when the time came in my life as it came in yours, when I had to make that decision whether to continue on in my madness or to reach out for recovery, if the program of Alcoholics Anonymous had been anything other than a program where the experiences of one alcoholic were being shared with another, if it wasn't that, I'm convinced I'd be dead today. I'd be back in a penitentiary today. I'd be back in Chicago Skid Row today. In other words, what I'm trying to say, if this had been an educational process, if this had been some kind of a place where I had to come in here on Monday morning and read chapter 5 and then Friday afternoon answer 20 true or false questions, forget it, Charlie, I could not have done that, you know. If I was required to write a 500-word written composition on chapter 3 more about alcoholism, I couldn't have done that. I just didn't have that capacity. I was fortunate enough to have placed in my life men who showed me the words of Alcoholics Anonymous, because I couldn't read that book all that well when I got it. I'm one of those what you call the nodders in AA. You know what a nodder is? He's an asshole that sits at a meeting trying to make you think he knows what you're talking about. He goes. And I used to sit at meetings and they'd be talking, they could have been calling me an asshole, and I'd be going, because I didn't know what they were talking about half of the time. But God put into my life 3 guys, you know, Ray, Ozzy, and Bob, and thank God for them men, you know. They walked the words of the book Alcoholics Anonymous, you know. They said something to me, and I was just talking to a lad here before the meeting, and maybe I shouldn't even say this because I'll get some of you upset and you get pissed off at me, and well, I can say it anyhow. You know, nowadays, I came here in 1950, you know, so I've been around here a while. I've been to a few meetings, and you see things changing a lot. And one of the popular expressions I hear up in Northern California a lot, you know, is people running around saying, I want you to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. I want you to go to 60 meetings in 60 days. Now, my guys didn't say that to me. My guys didn't say that to me. Thank God they didn't. See, what they said was, we are going to go to 90 meetings in 90 days. We are going to go to 60 meetings in 60 days. I think it's almost lethal to send a newcomer to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous unescorted. How the hell is he going to sit at a meeting knowing whether he's hearing right or wrong? He's in there looking for all the wrong things in the first place, you know that. He's in there looking for the holes. And so those are the kind of guys that worked with me. I'm no shining example of success in this program. It took me 6 years to get my first year of sobriety. At 24 years old, I couldn't believe I was an alcoholic, didn't think I was an alcoholic, didn't want to be an alcoholic, and even if I was, I wouldn't have come here anyhow. That's the kind of an attitude I had, you know. I'm a stonemason by trade. I retired from that in some years, but I spent most of my life, you know, in the construction business, and the only reason I tell you that is because I saw something this morning that I just got to share with somebody because it's busted inside of me, you know. I just, you know, times are so modern and sophisticated now, you know. When I have to drive down through the Napa Valley to get to the airport, I have to come through Marin County. That's one of our more affluent counties up there in north, you know, and peacock feathers and hot tubs and all that kind of crap. And because I was in the construction business, I still have an interest in construction projects, you know. So whenever I go past one, I sort of look at it, and sometimes I drive in, make sure they're doing it right, you know, and things like that. And here's this big sign up in front of this partially built thing, you know. Maybe this won't, your women may not understand this, but the guys will, you know. The sign says, you know, the name of the architect and the Board of Education names. Then it says, future site, for the Luella Francis Pennington High School. Jesus Christ. Can you imagine telling somebody you go to Luella Francis Pennington High School, yeah? The logo on their football helmets must be a canary, you know? The high school I went to in New York didn't even have a number. It didn't have a name, it had a number, as we were talking about it at dinner time, probably if it had a name, it should have been something like Lucky Luciano Tech, or Al Capone Prep, you know. Driver's education in my high school was how to leave the scene of an accident, you know. President of the senior class was a guy by the name of Vito. That ought to tell you the whole thing right there, you know. And so as I thought about these things, you know, at dinners, we was talking about, you know, growing up and all that, always looking, you know, always searching for the reason, you know, the reason I became like this, you know. I've had a million reasons, you know. I'm a poor kid in a poor time, a depression time. My father's a hood. My mother's shacked up with another hood. And you know, I'm a poor kid. Everything's wrong. I'm dumb. That's why I'm an alcoholic, you know. But, you know, that isn't really why. And I think I've pinpointed not only why I became an alcoholic, why all of us become alcoholics. Because, you see, we differ with them so-called social drinkers in that we make some kind of a discovery that we totally believe in that the normal drinker doesn't believe in. Let me tell you what I mean. When I say I enlisted in the Marines, that wasn't quite how it went. There was no war on, and I was involved in some extracurricular activities, we'll put it that way. I was in the hubcap business, and spotlights, and anything that wasn't tied down, you know. And it was enough of I had no problem as a kid with booze. I had a lot of problem with the New York Police Department, you know. Enough problems that one day they visited me in a little candy store that I was operating out of in the South Bronx, Mike. And they took me down to 90 Church Street, which is the federal building in New York City. And in the lobby of that building, they gave me an opportunity to make the most important decision of my life. They said, before you leave this building today, one of two things is going to take place. You're either going to voluntarily enlist in some branch of the military, or you're going to spend a year and a day at Rikers Island. And in those days, Rikers Island was New York City and County Juvenile Detention Facility. Definitely not a Disneyland place, I'll tell you that. And I would want to portray any image of bravado on my part. I wouldn't want any of you to think I'm a heroic fellow who wanted to defend our shores or protect all womanhood. It just made more sense to me to be in the military than to go to a year and a day in a reform school. So I wound up that day, you know, enlisting in the United States Marines. Now, I tell you this because it was that night. You know, if I was a sophisticate involved in the field of alcoholism treatment right now, I would say something like this. This was the night I was to develop my alcoholic personality. Because here I am, a punk kid. I'm just a little punk kid trying to be tough, but I know I'm not tough. My whole world is about 40 square city blocks. I knew every manhole, every alley, every rooftop in that 40 square city blocks. But outside of that, I didn't know nothing. I knew that New Jersey was on the other side of the Hudson River. I knew that. And I knew that if you went on up through the Bronx, through Westchester, you'd probably come to Connecticut pretty soon or something like that. But that's all I knew. And so I'm on this train going to this godforsaken place called Parris Island, South Carolina. I didn't even know whether we flew there or rode there or swam there. I thought Indians were still down there. I had no idea. My whole world was that 40 square city blocks. And so we got put on a train that night in Penn Station, and there were 6 other guys went into the Marines that same day with me. Now, I called them old guys. You know, they were probably 19, 20, you know. But they were guys that had been around the block a few times, had been standing on the corner on a Saturday night or something, you know. They knew the score. They weren't a little punk, little wimpy little guy like me, you know. And I was streetwise enough to know to keep my mouth shut, you know, which I did. And I listened to these guys talk, and that's when it happened. This is when I think this is what happens to all of us. One of these guys was a real cowboy. Now, I know this is no big deal to those of you who are native to the West out here. But I had never seen a cowboy in my life. Only guys I'd ever seen on a horse were cops, you know. And Jesus, I listened to this guy. He was not a phony guy. He had dirt on his hat and when the big buckles on, and he talked the cowboy words, you know, roping and fencing and things like that. And in the middle of his talk, he pulled a little bag and some papers out, you know, and he was, son of a, made a cigarette with his mouth. I had never seen anything like that in my life. And I wanted to be him. Holy Jesus, I wanted to be him. I wanted to do that roping and the fence, make the cigarettes, you know. But I only wanted to be that until somebody else started to talk. Next guy was sort of a liar because he said he was in a circus. What he really was, he was a stagehand in a burlesque show that traveled around with a carnival. But it didn't take a lot of figuring on my part to realize that this guy's a stagehand in a burlesque show. That means he is backstage when the stripteasers get finished their act. Wow. Now, I know topless is not sort of a big deal anymore in our permissive society. But boy, in 1941, for a little cherry like me, being backstage with stripteasers was the deep throat of my day, boy. And I wanted to be him. I wanted to be a stagehand in a burlesque show, you know. Only till somebody else started to talk. This guy really fascinated me because only about a week prior to sitting there alongside of me on that train, he had been in Reykjavik, Iceland. He was a merchant seaman, and he had enlisted in the Marines that day under a fictitious name to escape whatever kind of punishment the maritime was going to deal out. And it took me 2 years to figure this out. He said he had lost his ship in Manhattan. For 2 years I used to figure, how the Christ do you get a ship into Manhattan, you know? And I wanted to be him. Every one of you has been there. I wanted to be somebody other than what I was, and I wanted it right now, right now. I didn't want to be me. I wanted to be something other than me. And that's why we smoke funny little cigarettes. That's why we chop a line or two. That's why we put needles in our arms. That's why we drink, because we want to affect a change. And that's exactly what those things are called. Personality-changing agents. They change us. At least we're led to believe that they change us. All they do is distort our reality. That's all that drugs or alcohol can do. You know that, and I know that. They're anesthetics, and they anesthetize. They anesthetize our common sense. Enough common sense that if I drank a bottle of wine right now, I think I'd had a full head of hair. I'd have a 28-inch waist. And every one of the girls in here would be dying to get my bones, you know. That would be my distorted thinking. That would be my thinking, you know. Now, we get warnings along the way, you know, that maybe this thing called alcohol is not for you. Sometimes we heed these warnings. Sometimes we don't even see them. We don't understand them. Let me tell you about mine. I got a warning the very next morning. I don't know if any of you have ever been in South Carolina. This Marine base they got down there, they dump you off the train in some godforsaken place called Port Royal. Why the hell they ever give that place a name, I don't know. They ought to blow it off the map, you know. It is a nothing. It's a nothing place. It's a swamp. It's a big swamp. That's all the hell it is. It's got all of them trees that look like there's a dead crap all over them, you know, and the steam comes up out of the water and things fly through there, you know. It looks like where Dracula would hang out or something like that, you know. Now, the only other Marine I had seen so far was up there in that recruiting office, you know, and he had one of them band uniforms on, you know, blue crap and red all gold all over here and a big, holy Jesus. But it was different down there in Port Royal. First Marine I was to see there, but I can see him right now. Every time I talk about this, I see this guy coming. Coming right out of that fog, you know? And he didn't have on one of them band uniforms or any of that. I would have been better off with Dracula, to tell you the truth. This guy was about 5'8", and he was 5'8". Every way you looked at him, he was 5'8". And he had no neck. His head came right out of his chest like that. And he walked like he had a limp. He had one of the Smokey the Bear hats on. His face was bright red. Boy, and he threw it right up in my face and played chinny chin chin with me, you know, and spitting all over my face. He came out with that, well, I guess we got another one of them New York slickers here. Jesus Christ, that was like somebody took a javelin and threw it right through my head, you know. And you know what alcoholic rage is. That's when your actions overrule your common sense, and I hauled up and decked that asshole, boy. I spent the first 72 days of my Marine Corps career in a Paris Island brig. But I can't blame that. I don't think that's when I became an alcoholic. No. And I had no problems. You know, shortly after that, I was overseas, and war broke out. The Japanese got a good program, you know. It kept me sober for a while. Didn't cost anything either. But when I came back, like everybody else, I went back to my trade, you know, and I drank heavy, played heavy, worked heavy. That's just how I thought you lived. That's just how I thought you lived, you know. I wasn't trying to be an alcoholic. Matter of fact, when I came into Alcoholics Anonymous, you know, I believe it was the first of many spiritual things that have happened to me. And I want to point this one out to you because, you know, it takes a while to develop the full and total belief in spiritual things, especially that last sentence in the promises where it says, you will soon discover that God is doing for you what you could not do for yourself. When I first heard that, I said, oh, yeah, that's okay if you're asking for roller skates and wagons and things like that, you know. This is too heavy for that, you know. But boy, I look back in retrospect now. Try this on for size. I don't think I'm an alcoholic. I'm not having any problems with alcohol. Never been in jail, locked up in a hospital or anything like that. My wife isn't threatening me with a divorce. I'm raising 3 little boys, building a house, own a house, a car. I'm like everybody else. I owe money, but I'm making my payments. So in my day, I thought that was pretty good. And compared to a lot of people, it was very good. And then one day, I'm building a high school in a place called Rochelle, Illinois. One of the bricklayers, a guy by the name Eddie Friel, who was the Eddie Thatcher in my life. Eddie's the guy that carried the meeting to me and then went out and got drunk and never came back, you know. Died alone in a room in Dixon, Illinois. But Eddie walked into that little construction shanty we used as a field office that day, and he walked right up to me and he said these words, "Hey, Boomer," he said, "I'm an alcoholic and I belong to AA. Would you like to go to a meeting?" Jesus Christ, I wanted to kill him. I was never so humiliated or embarrassed in my life. The audacity of this guy to even associate my name with you people, you know. I was furious. And I wanted to just pull the skin right off his bone. And I looked for some brick tongs or something to hit him with, anything, you know. And then I mustered all of them filthy, disgusting words that only people like you and I in our drunkenness can author. And I mixed them up with all the hate and venom I knew. And I got him right up here, and I'm going to spit him right out of his face. And when it came out, it said, "Where is it?" You might think that's humorous, but let's look at that. I'm in a construction shanty, about 12 by 10. Only guys in there is me and Eddie. Eddie's the guy that asked the question. So it leaves only me left. Well, I don't think I'm an alcoholic. I don't want to be an alcoholic. Even if I was, I wouldn't have joined AA. So who said, "Where is it?" Somebody said it. Years later in the yard of an institution. Spiritual experience number 2. Another guy I hated. That AA guy from the H&I used to come in here every Sunday night with that box full of books. Hated that bastard. Vice President of the Locomotive Division of General Motors. Finally, one night I asked him to be my sponsor, something I thought I'd never ask anybody. I thought it'd look good on my sheet, maybe I'd get out early or something like that. And he said no. Again, that humiliation, you know. But before I could get into him, he said, Duff, if I'm going to be your sponsor, I want to tell you what it's going to be like. And then you think it over for a week. Well, come on, I can handle anything you wimps got. Throw it here, you know? And he says, if I'm your sponsor, I'm going to make every decision in your life for the next year without any comment from you. Oh, well, you know what I told him. And then I went back and faced the toughest week of my life. I knew I was wrong, but I was trying to prove I was right and he was wrong. There was no way I could do that. And I went back there the next Sunday night to tell him what he could do at AA, what he could do with that box full of literature and crap that he brings in here all the time. And I mustered again all of that hate and them words down in there and got him up here and I spit him right out in his face. Only when they come out it said, will you be my sponsor? Who said that? I didn't want him to be my sponsor. I didn't like that guy. I didn't think I was an alcoholic. I didn't want to join AA. What the hell am I doing with a sponsor? And I asked him that. And he's the man who walked me through the book Alcoholics Anonymous. But you know, why waste time telling you how we get drunk and how we get here? Hell, you all know how to do that. And I'm not going to stand here and embarrass you and take a blow-by-blow description of my trials and tribulations, you know. What happened to me had to happen to me, you know. I accept that now. I'm not sorry for any drink that I ever took. And it's going to sound weird to you right now, but I'm not sorry for any bit of harm that I must have caused. And I know I did. Because obviously all of that was necessary. All of that was necessary to bring me right here, you know, to Ventura, California, on April whatever the hell date this is. And this is the best place in the world for me, right here. And if anything in my past had changed, I wouldn't be here tonight. I wouldn't be here tonight. I told you I live up there in the Napa Valley. You know, a beautiful place. You ever seen a TV show called Falcon Crest? That's where I live, you know. I walk out on the deck of my house, I look right at Falcon Crest Winery, you know. Beautiful, enchanting land, you know. And I love it up there. I love it, you know. And I eat in a little Italian restaurant in between St. Helene and Calistoga. Every weekday, every week. I've been eating there for 25 years. Same restaurant. Just about the same 12 guys. We're like 12 little old ladies. We sit around one big round table. We get upset as hell if somebody sits in our chair, you know, or if they change the color of the napkins, you know, without asking us, you know. And I'm the only guy in the bunch that doesn't drink. Other guys are all big men in the wine industry. You know their names, the Mondavis, Brother Timothy from Christian Brothers, Louis Martini, and the Krug guys, and all big wine-producing men, you know, who obviously have never had any problems with drinking, you know. They all know who I am. They know what the hell I do and all of that, so there's no big deal. And these guys bring their wines to lunch, and we do like 12 guys would do at lunch. We tell dirty jokes, and we talk about the 49ers or the Giants or the A's, or talk about girls, you know, and it's just good camaraderie, you know, for an hour and a half. And they pass these wine bottles back and forth with their private blends and new things they're trying on each other. And because of the popularity down in the Napa Valley, there's always visitors coming from foreign countries to these wineries, you know, big shots. And so, you know, inevitably they invite someone to have lunch with us. And only due to the proximity of the tables, it just seems that when they have a visitor, they reach for an extra chair, and they pull it right up alongside of me. So I always wind up with the visitor alongside of me, which is fine. About 5 minutes, you know, into the meal, he notices that my glass is turned upside down. Then he says it, and you've all had it said to you. Don't you drink? Well, you know, we're allowed to lie a little bit, you know, after you're sober for a while. So I said, well, not today. Mother-in-law's coming tonight, or I'm going to the dentist, or some kind of crap like that. Now, that would be all right. That would be all right. But about 10 minutes later, and you got your mouth half full of tortellini, you know, and he says, why? Well, I'm not going to stand up and say, well, I'm bound by an obligation to tell you what it was like, what happened, what it's like now. I ain't going to go through all of that kind of crap. love food, man. That should be very obvious to you. I love food, you know. I love food so much that I gave up sex for food. I even had a mirror installed in the ceiling of my dining room. But I want to tell you, I got to make a little confession to you. When people ask me that question, for a long time in my life, I didn't know how to answer it. I always knew inside of my gut, you know, why I no longer put funny things in my arm or up my nose or smoke funny little cigarettes or drink anything else, you know. I always have known inside my gut, but I've never been able to tell anybody. I was always afraid because of my lack of familiarity with language and stuff like that I'd tell it in some crazy way and you'd find out how stupid I was, you know. And so I would just shut up. I'd nod, I'd the nodder, you know. But inside of me, it used to want to scream, just like it does now, why I don't want to drink, why I don't want to use any of that kind of stuff. But I just didn't know how to tell anybody that. And then one day, I got invited to participate in the anniversary of AA in Stockton, California. Let's face it, Stockton is not the French Riviera, you know? Stockton's about as exciting as an empty paint can, you know? But I'm down there and it's hotter than hell in the summertime and I'm trying to cool off in a little mama-papa type motel down there and then watching one of them Saturday afternoon classics on TV, you know? Shirley Temple makes it with Godzilla or some kind of crap like that. When all of a sudden the commercial came on, and you've all seen this commercial because it was a national award-winning commercial, and ironically it advertised beer. This commercial had such an impact on me that I researched it, and it was actually filmed right there in San Francisco Bay. And it was filmed on one of them beautiful October days, which of course many of you know is our summer in San Francisco, is in October. And it showed all these little sailing boats out on the bay, you know, and then they zoomed in with the cameras onto the deck of one of these boats. And there was all young people running up and down on the decks, you know, and they had cut-off blue jeans on and funny little T-shirts and weird little hats. And they're diving into the bay and shimmying up on the mast and swinging on the lines, dropping into the bay, just jackassing around, having a big old time. And then the punchline came on. It said, you only go around once. Grab all of the gusto you can. And I didn't know what the hell gusto meant. And I went out to the desk and I borrowed a dictionary from the people out there. And I looked up the word gusto. And it says, you only go around once. Grab all of the gusto. And gusto in that book is defined as slang expression for living. You only go around once. Grab all of the living you can. And that's why at approximately 10 after 5 this morning, with the help of a God of my understanding and the knowledge of a program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I made a decision to do the very best that I could do today without putting a needle in my arm, chopping a line or two, smoking a joint, or whatever the hell else I was playing with. Because I want every bit of living I can get. Life is the most precious thing that you or I or anybody else who walks the face of this earth will ever experience. It's the most precious thing that we know, and it's called life. And there's some very cold facts about life that perhaps we'd better review every now and then. You know, the moment that life starts, it begins to get shorter. Every unit of time that goes by is a portion of your life that is over. Done. Finished. In a much colder vein, every unit of time that goes by, whether it be an hour, a day, or a week, as it goes by, that brings you that much closer to the end of your life. For instance, is today the 29th? 30th? Never again will you or I or any other human being on the face of this earth experience 8:30 p.m. April 30th, 1993. That's a part of your life that is over. It's been used up and it's done. And life isn't a VCR. You can't put it on rewind or pause or hold back or fast forward or anything like that. Life goes at its pace. And the older you get, you're beginning to think it's running pell-mell, you know, towards its inevitable end. The other thing that we share in common in this room tonight. We know that life as we know it today will cease. There will be an end to this thing that we enjoy today called life. And so for the time that I am going to experience that life, I want every bit of it I can get. I want to go every place there is to go. I want to sing every song that was ever sung. I want to read every book that was ever written. I want to see every picture that was ever painted. I want it all. And there's really nothing wrong with wanting it all, as long as I have enough sense to know I'm not going to get it all. But that's what makes you and I a little bit more fortunate than a lot of other people. Because you and I know something, or we should know something, that we can get more out of life clean and sober than we ever got out of it using and abusing. And we didn't need anybody to teach us that. We didn't have to read that in the book. We went out and found that out for ourselves, didn't we? I have never met a person in Alcoholics Anonymous that has said that life got worse when they quit drinking. I've never heard anybody say, Jesus, they miss the emergency rooms. It's been a long time since I've been in the tank. God damn, I got all my bills paid again. And that's why I make these decisions. But that decision is hard to make sometimes, because I'm doing business with the most powerful thing in the world. The toughest thing that I've ever taken on and you ever taken on. I don't know who's responsible for the definition in the big book, but he's a genius when he said, alcohol, cunning, baffling, and powerful. Oh, how powerful. I drank more the last year of my drinking than I did in any other year in my life, trying harder not to get drunk. Not willing to accept the fact that if you don't want to get drunk, why don't you just stop drinking? That's too simple. I can't stand it, either can you, because we can't stand simplicity, you know. And I don't want to throw a wet blanket on your party here, but you know, besides all the hoopla and everything, this is also a program of life and death for some of us. And we can't be so naive to believe that everybody in this room tonight is finished drinking. You know that's not true, and I know that's not true, and that's not because of any wisdom, that's just because of the experience of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you think I originated that, you weren't listening to when the book was read here at the outset of the meeting. Quote, book Alcoholics Anonymous. Despite all that we can say, many who are real alcoholics by every form of self-deception and experimentation will try to prove themselves the exception to the rule. I don't know who amongst us is going to drink tonight. It could be me. It could be any of us in this room. And why? Why? We call them slips, don't we? Got a little trivia game for you. There's one absolute requirement for a slip. Does anybody know what that is? It has to be an absolute requirement. Well, we'll save time. You have to be sober. Now, think about that. Any of us in this room who drinks again will make that decision when you're sober. And that scares the hell out of me. Scares the living hell out of me. And that's why I have to come to these meetings, to be reminded of what can happen if I begin to entertain any kind of insane thoughts like that. And I entertain them sometimes. I get them thoughts. Not too long ago, I was in an airport. You know, I still get upset. I got to confess, I make a damn fool out of myself sometimes. The maitre d' is hustling us. We're trying to get a seat to eat dinner, and he's, well, oh, everything's all taken up. Stand at the bar, you know. Well, I'll call you. We're going to take. So we're standing at the corner of the bar, me and this other guy, and having a ginger ale or something. And there's a little tiny round table, a cute little thing, a little round table right down where I'm standing. Look like something my mother would put a fern on, you know, something like that, you know. And all of a sudden, a couple of them skinny-ass skier type come in there, you know. And they sat down at that little tiny table. And I didn't pay too much attention to it until they ordered a drink. I didn't hear nothing. But Jesus, I was fascinated when it came. Biggest drink I ever saw in my life. Two Looked like two big candy dishes, you know, great big thing. And I got a little bit interested in that, and I'm looking at them, and had all sorts of things in it. You know, it had an olive in there, and an onion, and a dead fish was in there, a whole lot of crap, you know. And I'm all caught up in this now. And I'm waiting to see this guy pick that up and let it go, right? And they start to talk. And he's hitting that little onion back and forth with a stick, you know. Well, I thought it was a week and a half. It was probably only about 2 seconds. I felt like just grabbing him, you know, and saying, drink that son of a bitch, look at it, crazy. Because if you can drink, you should drink. Why? You shouldn't be out there talking and fooling around, all that kind of crap, you know. Another time coming back from Atlanta, very embarrassing, very embarrassing. You know, when you come to conventions like this, I've been to the Georgia State Convention, and you know, you get on the big high over the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday morning, you know, then about Sunday afternoon, and I didn't want to let it go. I was having such a good time. Oh, I wanted to hold on, you know, oh, great, great. And I had to get about a 10-minute after 7 flight in the morning back to San Francisco, come through Dallas. And I'm thinking, I gotta keep my hat on, and I'll keep that badge on, because maybe there'll be some Texans on the plane, you know, and who is at the convention, and at least for another couple hours we can sort of bullshit each other, you know. And I'm on the plane, and I'm sitting in mine. I might get the aisle seat, 3 seats in, you know, and I'm way in the back, smoking days. And I'm looking at everybody coming on. Nobody got a badge on, nobody with the little hats on. Pretty soon, the biggest guy I've ever seen in my life, 19'11", you know, big guy from Texas. He come in, he said, pardon me, partner. You know, I got the window seat. And he come in over me, hit me on the side with his buckle and everything, and I'm booming. And the plane takes off. And here she comes, coffee, tea, and me, you know, down the aisle. 10 after 7 in the morning, she says, would you like a drink? Nobody ever said that to me, you know, I was drinking. You know, not at 10 after 7. It was always, Christ, you drinking this early? You know? And I said, no thanks. I says, I'd like a black coffee with sugar. She said, okay. She said, how about you, sir? It's a text, you know. And I'm listening, you know. What's he going to have? What's he going to have, you know? And it took a long time, and he says, give me some coffee, too. Poing! The antenna went up. He's on AA. But, you know, I didn't want to come on too strong. He might have been a general service representative or something like that. Get all upset, you know. So I threw a couple of them one-liners at him, you know, and she came with the coffee, and I had to hand it to him, and I looked at him right in the eye, you know, and I said, easy does it. He didn't say nothing. A little while later, he was lighting a cigarette. He dropped his lighter, and it rolled over by me, and I picked it up. First things first. I gave him about 3 shots like that, you know. I still got the badge on. Then I made a mistake. He just looked at me. He says, y'all trying to tell me something? And I winked. I said, we belong to the same club. And I could almost feel that San Francisco lighting up on here, you know. Oh, this guy looked at me and he said, what in the hell club you all talking about? I said, AA. And Jesus, he went up like a rocket. He crushed his hat on the luggage thing. And at the top of his lungs, everybody turned around in the plane. Oh, he said, God damn all the hell. What the hell made you think I'm an alcoholic? I said, cool it. I said, because you drank coffee. He says, I like coffee. I said, yeah, but you could have had a drink, you know. I said, I had coffee because I'm an alcoholic, you know. And the more I'm talking, the more he's getting madder at me, you know. And pretty soon he got the hell up and moved up front there someplace, got the hell away from me, you know. But that's how fanatical, you know, we can get about this because, you know, this is our life, you know. This is our life. I don't know how many of you might be new in here tonight, but you're about to embark, if you're new, you're about to embark on the greatest adventure that you'll ever experience, you know. We could tell you things here tonight that you wouldn't believe, you know. If I had a crystal ball and I could say what's going to take place in your life the next 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, you know, you'd laugh at me. You'd say, that some bitch is back smoking weed or something, you know. Because it would sound impossible. You'd say the same thing that I would have said, you know, some 30-odd years ago when I was sitting in front of a blood bank in Chicago, Illinois, waiting to go in and sell my lousy blood for $4 so I could get enough wine to last till noon. What do you think I would have said to that jerk from AA that was hanging around that blood bank? If he had said to me, hey, Duff, all you got to do is stop drinking, and in 1993 you'll be living out there in the Napa Valley, you'll have a beautiful home, beautiful business, family all be back. I'd say, get out of here. What are you, smoking dope? Because I would not have been able to believe it. But yet the testimonial of people around meetings like this all over the world says it's true, says it's true. I want to tell you one thing, you know, in closing, because I heard some people talking when I was sitting at the table there with Sonny, and I was sort of listening to these guys at the other end. And he said he wanted to he'd probably stick around if he was sure it was going to work. Looking for the guarantee, you know, well, we all look for the guarantee. Well, I have a personal opinion that there is in the book the words that guarantee our sobriety, but I don't want to get into no argument with you tonight, but I'll throw them at you quick. Second and third are the three pertinent ideas. They tell it to us in black and white. It says that we believe that no human power can relieve our alcoholism. And then they make the most definite statement in the book is made next. It says, but God, and they called him God, could and would. Now, you can't get any more sure than that. Then they pushed it right back where it belongs, into our laps, our choice, if he was sought. But there's another guarantee that I would offer you tonight, and I say this not to impress you and not to sound braggadocious or anything like that, only to share. You know, in all the years that I've been associated with Alcoholics Anonymous, I've been extremely fortunate, extremely fortunate. I've been allowed to participate in AA activities in every state in the United States, you know, some of them on more than one occasion, you know. I have been allowed to participate in activities in 9 foreign countries. I just came back from Australia National Convention 2 weeks ago. And I have met an awful lot of people in AA. If our membership, our census now is a little over 1 million, without even thinking of lying, I would say that I know at least 150,000 members of AA. Maybe I don't know their full names and how to spell it, but I know them, the nod to, and hi, Joe, and all of that, you know. And we've had a cup of coffee together, we've been on a bus together or something. And in all of these years, which would be 43 now since I started going to meetings, I guess I've been to about 200 meetings a year. So that's close to 10,000 meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And with your understanding that I fully realize that I am in a continuing state of learning, that every day I can learn, I know that. But please understand what I'm about to say when I say that right now I think I have heard everything you could hear in AA. I don't think we could get into a discussion on the 12 steps right now, where if I didn't try hard enough, I couldn't recall a similar discussion someplace else at some other time. Same holds true for the concepts, the traditions. I don't think anybody could get up and tell their story where it would be so unique that there isn't a parallel someplace else out there that I've been. In other words, what I'm trying to say is I've heard everything there is to say except one thing. Now, what I'm about to tell you, I'm going to repeat twice because I get misquoted in this too often. The thing that I have never heard in this program has been far more important to me than everything I have heard. The thing that I have never heard in this program has been far more important to me than anything I have heard. Because you see, I have never heard a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous, as I said before, say that my life got worse when I quit drinking. I've never heard that. And you've never heard that. And you know damn well you're never going to hear that. You would think that would be enough. You would think that we could get up from our chairs now totally relieved and say, Jesus, it's over. But for some strange reason, it's not. We can't just accept that truth. Some of us, because of our self-centeredness, got to go out and try to disprove it. But what does that say? If there are 1 million members of Alcoholics Anonymous, let's say I brought them down here with me tonight. Got them out there in the parking lot right now. 1 million sober members of Alcoholics Anonymous. And we're going to bring them through that door there right now. And we've asked them to answer only one question. Did your life get better or worse when you stopped drinking? Is there anybody in this room right now so sick, so full of denial, so self-centered, that you could deny what you know you would hear? You would hear 1 million people, and if you want to know what they look like, turn to your left and turn to your right, because you're part of that 1 million. You would hear 1 million people like you walk up to this podium and say, my life got better when I stopped drinking. That's 1 million. But yet, what did I quote from the book before? Despite all that we can say, many who are real alcoholics. So there probably sits amongst us somebody in this room right now, at least one, who will make a decision when he or she is sober to drink again. 1 million to 1. There's not a casino, there's not an insurance company in the world that would take on that bet. Nobody would take on a bet of 1 million to 1, except us. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt your viewing. Taper Dave here. Just wanted to take a second to ask you to like and subscribe to my channel. Let me know if you like what you're listening. I've got some very good talks here, and this one's a great one. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Tell me what you think. Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right, but I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.